The best things have been calumniated. That's what I always say. I have been zealous, maybe a little too zealous, to promote the common good. And what do I get? Colder entertainment than an outdoor hockey game. I have been treated with suspicion instead of love, and with resentment instead of thanks. And the other day, I found a bunch of cavil holes in what had been a perfectly sound argument. But turning serious now, I am overwhelmed with gratitude for the role the Lord has allowed me to play in helping thousands of people out there understand their King James Bibles. I don't really care about the cavils. I'm going to tell the truth. The King James Version, through no fault of the King James translators or of modern readers, but solely because of the natural force of language change, now contains numerous false friends, words that we modern readers don't know, that we don't realize we're misunderstanding. This morning, on my very last day of engaging publicly on this channel with King James onlyists, I put up my 100th false friend. Hell, my series of 50 false friends reached 100. My original goal for the series was 50. I even foolishly proclaimed that I was done after 50 about 2 or 3 years ago. But I wanted to show that the list was too large to memorize, and the examples just kept coming. Many, I would say most of them, sent in by viewers who were trained in my simple, not patented methods. I think 100 is enough to make my point. So let's do another 50. In this video, my very last one before the stroke of midnight, on the last night of the year, I'm going to do 50 more false friends, 50. At the end, my series will hereby be officially rechristened 150 false friends in the King James Version. Understandest thou what thou readest? You're gonna. Buckle up your thinking cap, everybody out there, because we're going to hit the road running. Once we reach the finish line, I will be finally, officially done addressing King James onlyism on the popular level on this channel, minus the tiny exceptions that I gave myself in my done video shot in London. And that includes promoting the Lexham Press book about King James false friends that is now with my editor, provisionally titled King James Words You Don't Know. Look for it in the next year or so, maybe 2026, wherever nerdy and hilarious books about how language change affects our ability to understand the King James Version are sold. We're going to start with False Friend 101, charity. I can understand why King James onlyists would scoff at my calling charity a false friend. Who doesn't know this word? Well, the plowboy, for one, or that is, he doesn't know the meaning of the word as it appears sometimes in the King James Version. My good friend Tim Berg has 2 excellent lengthy posts on this word charity and why Tyndale quite purposefully used love instead of charity and how this choice infuriated the Catholic English intellectual Thomas More. I urge you to read Tim's pieces at kjbhistory.com. I should have done a full video on charity, I now realize. This is just fascinating. Tim thinks language change is the reason that the King James translators sometimes chose the Latinate word charity over the good old word that the Angles used to use to tell the Saxons they loved them. The King James does use the word love countless times, however, and I'll mention that those who say that the King James is best because it sticks to Anglo-Saxon need to explain to me why love, this all-important word, wouldn't do for the King James translators in 28 places and 24 verses. Instead of delving into that history, however, I want to discuss primarily how the word charity is likely to be understood or misunderstood today. I'm not thinking mainly of the love chapter. It would be kind of cool if we could call it the charity chapter after all, 1 Corinthians 13. That chapter contains enough context to indicate what charity is supposed to mean. Or so I would suppose. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself. It's not puffed up. But I wonder about passages that don't include much context. There are 2 major senses of charity in contemporary English that I think people will hear when they read the King James Version. One is the voluntary giving of help, typically in the form of money to those in need. That and almost all my contemporary English definitions will come from the New Oxford American Dictionary, as will this sample sentence. The care of the poor must not be left to private charity. And I just have to imagine that many King James readers have silently, without ever realizing it, misunderstood this verse that uses the word charity. I know thy works, and charity, and service, and faith, and thy patience, and thy works, and the last to be more than the first. I might mix up my British sort of accent with my American one reading the King James. Sorry, I already have done so. That context has surely pointed some readers toward the voluntary giving of help sense. Here's the other major current sense. kindness and tolerance in judging others. Sample sentence, she found it hard to look on her mother with much charity. In other King James uses of charity that don't provide sufficient contextual clues, I think this is the sense that people will hear. Let all your things be done with charity. That's 1 Corinthians 16:14. And above all things, have fervent charity among yourselves, for charity shall cover the multitude of sins. That's 1 Peter 4:8. Your faith groweth exceedingly, and the charity of every one of you all toward each other aboundeth. That is 2 Thessalonians 1:3. Kindness and tolerance in judging others is part of love, but it isn't the whole. And of course, love is a better translation today in all the verses that I've listed. The Oxford English Dictionary actually has a little paragraph explaining that one element of Christian love in 1 Corinthians 13, thinketh no evil, has become the whole of charity. It's a little difficult for me to speak with confidence as to how the very vulgar of 1611, the common people, the plowboy, would have understood charity in 1 Corinthians 13 and other passages in the King James, but Tim Berg and the Oxford English Dictionary think it would have been understood to mean love. The Oxford English Dictionary names the relevant senses as obsolete. Presuming that the first readers of the King James would have understood charity to mean love, this is a presumption that can no longer be made. I believe we have false friend 101. False friend 102. Staggered. Paul says in Romans 4:20 that Abraham staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strong in faith, giving glory to God. I forgot my British accent already. Okay, the Greek word here means waver or doubt. The contemporary New Oxford American Dictionary says that stagger, however, usually names something physical, a physical motion, to walk or move unsteadily, as if about to fall. And that's how I always took this verse in Romans 4. Abraham didn't stagger backward, physically overcome by the shock of God's promise. The New Oxford does say that there is an archaic sense of stagger that meant precisely to waver in purpose or to hesitate. The OED has the same sense, quote, to begin to doubt or waver in an argument, opinion, or purpose, to become less confident or determined, to hesitate or waver at. The OED says that this sense is now rare. The Geneva Bible says that Abraham did not doubt of the promises of God. Modern translations say that Abraham didn't waver in unbelief, and that's what the King James translators were trying to say too. In our English, we'd say of Abraham, no unbelief made him waver concerning the promise of God. In fact, we do say that. I just quoted the English Standard Version. Stagger in 1611, in a context like this one, meant waver. It doesn't today. We have a false friend. False friend 103, desired. Jesus says to Peter in Luke 22:31, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. Jesus says to us all in Mark 11:24, what things soever ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. But the Greek words here do not mean wish for or want. They mean ask. The Oxford English Dictionary contains several rare, archaic, and obsolete senses of desire, meaning something like ask. One is to ask a person to do something. Another is to express a wish or make a request to a person, to petition, to ask. Satan didn't just want to have Peter. He explicitly verbally asked to have him, presumably like he asked God if he could touch Job. Jesus did not promise us that we'd have whatever we want. He promised us whatever we asked for. As Fledge says in Narnia about Aslan, I have a sort of feeling he likes to be asked. Where readers in 1611 heard ask, we hear want. We have a false friend. False friend 104, require. This word is quite similar to desire. Consider this verse from 1 Corinthians. The Jews require a sign and the Greeks seek after wisdom. Leading King James onlyist Chuck Surratt uses this passage to argue that the New King James is inferior to the King James because, he says, it weakens this verse. Here's the New King James. Jews request a sign and Greeks seek after wisdom. From require to request, why the apparent softening or weakening? Chuck Surratt here was tripped up by a false friend, one I had not noticed until he brought it up. It is true that the Greek word here can mean either ask or demand, a weak request or a strong one. The crowd at Jesus' trial before Pilate were instant with loud voices requiring that he might be crucified. That surely meant demand and so requiring doesn't quite work in today's English. But this Greek word here in the passage I've brought up is far more often translated ask than demand. It's the standard word for asking. And at the very least, the weaker option is totally legitimate in 1 Corinthians 1:22. In fact, it's the one the King James translators took, because require in 1611 in a context like 1 Corinthians 1:22 just meant ask, not demand. The OED says that the word require could in 1611 mean to ask, request, or beseech a person to do something. They say that this sense of require is obsolete. To see other places where require in the King James meant only ask and not demand, you just do a word search. For example, Ezra says in Ezra 8:22, I was ashamed to require of the king a band of soldiers and horsemen to help us against the enemy. Priests within captive, subjugated nations don't require kings to give them things in the modern sense of require. Ezra was instead talking about asking, requesting. To make matters more complicated, a number of modern translations do go for demand at Ezra 8:22, while others stick with ask. It's about evenly split. But this is yet another judgment call, not a matter of right or wrong. The King James translators themselves included alternate translations in the margins of the 1611 King James. Why is it so bad for two translations to choose different viable options? At the very least, it is not necessary to declare a clear winner here at Ezra 8:22, and not at 1 Corinthians 1:22 either, once you realize that by require, the King James translators meant request. To be clear, require is not a false friend everywhere it appears in the King James. You have to be a highly sensitive and knowledgeable, skillful reader, I think, to discern when require is a false friend and when it isn't. False friend 105. In Jeremiah 1:17, God tells Jeremiah, Gird up thy loins and arise and speak unto them all that I command thee. Be not dismayed at their faces, lest I confound thee before them. Confound. The Hebrew word here means to terrify, dismay, or shatter. It refers to a destructive action, either literal destruction or the psychological destruction associated with dismay or terror. The most common meaning of confound today, the one that most readers will assume here, I think, is to cause surprise or confusion in someone, especially by acting against their expectations. The King James sounds to modern readers like it's saying that God will confuse Jeremiah's speech or something. He'll be confounded. He won't know what to say. He'll be confused. But the OED shows that this word confound once had a sense to discomfit, abash, put to shame, ashame. It says that this word is almost always in passive, which is precisely what we find in Scripture in the King James. And indeed, the OED says that this sense is chiefly scriptural. The OED says that there is another obsolete sense of confound that is even more severe. Here it is: to defeat utterly, discomfit, bring to ruin, destroy, overthrow, rout, bring to naught, an adversary. I think this sense also shows up in the King James. And her whole land shall be confounded, and all her slain shall fall in the midst of her. That's Jeremiah 51:47. The King James does use the word confound in the sense of confuse, the sense we still use today. The OED describes this sense this way: to throw into confusion of mind or feelings, so to surprise and confuse a person that he or she loses for the moment his or her presence of mind and discernment what to do. That's how I understood the Jeremiah verse at first. God at Babel decided to confound their language. He didn't put it to shame. In other words, that is the way we still use the word. But depending on context, sometimes confound in the King James Version means something we don't use it to mean in contemporary English. Sometimes it's false friend 105 on my official list of 150 false friends. False friend 106, convinced. Paul says in that chapter that's so key to this channel, 1 Corinthians 14, if all prophesy, and there come in one that believeth not, or one unlearned, he will be convinced of all, and judged of all. The Greek words translated convinced of all don't mean persuaded by all, or certain of all, even though he used to not be. The key Greek word here means convicted. The unbeliever, if he hears words he can understand, will be convicted by all the people and all that he hears in church. The OED shows that the word convinced used to be able to mean to prove a person to be guilty or in the wrong, especially by judicial procedure, to prove or find guilty, to convict of an offense or error. This sense, it says, is obsolete. We don't use convince to mean this any longer. but the King James translators did. Jude 15 says that the Lord is coming to execute judgment upon all and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds. That didn't mean in 1611 that he would persuade them to acknowledge that they were wrong. It meant that he would come to pronounce them guilty, whether they acknowledged their sin before him or not. In Job 32, in the King James, Elihu says, "There was none of you that convinced Job or that answered his words." That's actually another obsolete sense of our word convince, namely to overcome a person in argument, to prove to be wrong, confute, according to the OED. Paul did this kind of convincing. He mightily convinced the Jews, and that publicly, showing by the scriptures that Jesus was Christ. That does not mean what it sounds like to us, that they were persuaded. He convinced them. Most of them were not convinced. No, they were confuted, overcome in argument, shown to be in the wrong. Are you convinced that this is a false friend? I shall move on to false friend 107, conversation. Conversation was already false friend 27. What giveth? Well, it has yet another sense in the New Testament, just once, that is so different from number 27 that it warrants separate mention. I checked with the International Olympic Committee for False Friends, and they said that I could put it on the list twice for this reason, as long as these senses are sufficiently different. I'm going to do this another time or two on this list. And just in case this makes you feel antsy, like I'm cheating to get to 150, I've got more false friends than 150, so I could have easily replaced this and the others that are doubled if the committee voted down my proposal. Conversation is one of the few false friends that most King James onlyists seem to be willing to acknowledge as a false friend. Conversation is a well-known false friend. It usually means, in the New Testament, lifestyle or manner of conduct. Let your conversation be as becometh the saints. But it doesn't always mean that. In just one place in the King James, it means something totally different. In Philippians 3:20, Paul says that our conversation is in heaven, from whence also we look for the Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. Does that make sense? Our lifestyle is in heaven, our manner of life is in heaven? Well, maybe, but not really. The Greek word here means a state, a politically organized body of people under a single government, especially as the place where one's citizenship and loyalties lie. Contemporary dictionaries simply do not have a sense for this word conversation that comes anywhere close to the meaning of this Greek word. So I raise this question as I've done 1,000 times. Did the King James translators get this one wrong? No, no, no. As usual, no. The OED shows that the word conversation once had a now obsolete sense, the action of living or having one's being in a place or among persons, and it's now obsolete. Now, this is obscure but definite. Modern translations use a word that is more clear to modern English speakers. Our citizenship is in heaven. That's false friend 107. Here's false friend 108, great waster. It's that word waster. Proverbs 18:9 tells us that he also that is slothful in his work is brother to him that is a great waster. My dad used to say, be a food taster, not a food waster. I remember when I was little, he would say, eat meat, eat meat. 33% of my own children are picky eaters, and I tell him all the time, eat your food, eat your food. He is a great waster of excellent food that his mother has made. Literally today, as I was stacking the dishwasher, I put perfectly good food into the garbage disposal from his little plate. Ah, well, my poor little son is, according to Scripture, brother to him that is slothful, right? This is one of those false friends where the proper sense does still exist in our English, but where I judge that context simply will not get many readers there. The dangerous sense of the word will be uppermost in nearly all minds today. Because the word waster here doesn't mean someone who squanders money or fails to eat perfectly good food. It's akin to the phrase laid waste and to the taunt someone you just killed in a video game battle might receive. Wasted! It's also akin, though less, to the person who destroys himself on drugs or alcohol. Wasted. The Hebrew word translated waster means destroyer. We just don't use waster to mean someone who lays waste, even though laying waste is still a word that we use in English. If perhaps more literary English, what John McWhorter would call twee. And of course, the OED shows that waster used to be able to mean one who lays waste, despoils or plunders, a devastator, ravager, plunderer. In 1575, an English translation of Martin Luther's commentary on Galatians said this of Paul, "Of a persecutor and waster of the church, he was made an apostle." I just sense we would not say that anymore. But False Friend 108 and Proverbs 18:9 tripped up people of the stature of Matthew Henry, John Gill, and a random King James only pastor I found on Sermon Audio. I just have to share this. John Gill, the great commentator, he thought that the great waster was a prodigal man who spends his substance in riotous living. Henry thought great wasters were wasters of their estates, who, this is how he explains it, who live above what they have, spend and give more than they can afford, and so, in effect, throw away what they have and suffer it to run to waste. I believe this interpretation really is just impossible. Nonetheless, it tripped up a 1611 King James only pastor in Ohio, to whom I now deliver you.
The slothful is the one who is lazy, unmotivated, and unproductive. The great waster is the one with plenty of time, money, and talent, but is equally unproductive while being frivolous in the way he wastes his time, money, and talent. There's story after story of the sloth coming into large amounts of money, not only through the lottery and casinos, but through acts of crime, or through legitimate means like inheritances. They receive estates and things, and other means. And that sloth then, regardless of how they came into that wealth, they would just waste it all. It's just a matter of time before a sloth with great wealth wastes it all and ends up being a poor sloth again. That's the cycle.
This is how English-only exegesis and King James onlyism combine to take God's word away from the people of God, word by archaic word. Proverbs 18:9 is actually saying that someone who is slothful is as bad as someone who is terribly destructive. Hat tip here goes to my best friend of longstanding, Brian Collins, who sent this to me. False Friend 109, dishonesty. Paul in 2 Corinthians 4:2 says that he has renounced the hidden things of dishonesty. Everybody knows that dishonesty means not telling the truth. It means deceitfulness, right? But the Greek word there in that verse I just read doesn't mean that. It means a shameful act. The King James itself translates this Greek word with shame and not with dishonesty. Everywhere else it appears. So why use dishonesty here? Isn't that wrong? No, there is in the OED an obsolete sense of dishonesty that meant dishonor, disgrace, discredit, shame, with plural, a dishonorable or disgraceful action. This is, of course, very like False Friend 20, honest, which in the King James phrase, all godliness and honesty, means not truthfulness, but conforming to accepted or suitable standards of behavior. This is, of course, an obsolete sense, as is dishonesty, the one time it appears in the King James. False Friend 110, message. Message appears just one time as a false friend in the King James. But his citizens hated him and sent a message after him, saying, "We will not have this man to reign over us." That's Luke 19:14. The Greek word here doesn't mean message, however. It means ambassador. It's very clear. That same Greek word also occurs here. Or else, while the other is yet a great way off, he sendeth an ambassage, or is it ambassage? I don't know. And desireth conditions of peace. There's desire for you again. It means asks for. An ambassage is a dead word clearly related to ambassador. It meant a person or group sent on a diplomatic or political mission. So clearly the King James translators knew that this Greek word meant ambassador. So why did they use message instead in one place? Because message itself used to be able to mean a person or body of people conveying a communication, one or more messengers or envoys, an ambassadorial delegation. Doesn't this feel a little crazy? I mean, who in the whole English-speaking world doesn't know what a message is? It's a verbal, written, or recorded communication sent to or left for a recipient who cannot be contacted directly. Or is it? There's nothing philosophically necessary about the sounds in message that require that those sounds referred to verbal communication. In a different English than ours, message could mean something it can't mean in our English. The King James shows this, and you will never get all this from context. You will only get this if you read Greek, if you read other translations, or if you slog through obscure videos like this one. We have a false friend. False Friend 111, commune. Genesis 23 says that Abraham communed with the sons of Heth, saying, If it be your mind that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and entreat for me to Ephron the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah. But isn't that kind of odd? Not only did I mix up my accents, but the word commune, to commune with someone in our English is to share one's intimate thoughts or feelings with someone else, especially on a spiritual level. The purpose of praying is to commune with God, says my dictionary. To commune with someone or something is to feel in close spiritual contact with that person or thing. He spent an hour communing with nature on the bank of a stream. To commune, says the OED, is to communicate intimately with someone, especially at a deep level of mental or spiritual engagement, to attain a state of rapport with spiritual unity with something. Is that what Abraham was doing with the sons of Heth? Sounds like he was just telling them something, communicating maybe, but not communing. He was telling them to ask Ephron to let him buy some property. And indeed, the Hebrew word translated communed in the King James here is just a common word for spoke. Why did the King James translators use what is to us such a very specific and intense word? Why Abraham communed and not just Abraham spoke? Because, as the OED shows, commune used to be able to mean, in the intransitive, to talk together, converse with someone, to communicate, to confer, to consult. This sense is now rare or archaic in later use. The OED shows that commune in 1611 could also mean what it means today, and I think it does mean this in a few passages. I call to remembrance my song in the night. I commune with mine own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. That's Psalm 72:6. And he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone, written with the finger of God. That's Exodus 31:18. But in many more King James passages, commune in 1611 just meant communicated. We've got a false friend. False friend 112 out of 150. We're on our way, folks. Turtle. In Leviticus 12, we're told that if a woman who has recently given birth is not able to bring a lamb for her required sacrifice, then she shall bring 2 turtles or 2 young pigeons. Now, they had lambs and pigeons in ancient Israel, clearly, but did they have turtles? I don't know. But I do know that this creates some tension within the King James. For in the Gospel of Luke, the text tells us that Joseph and Mary offered a sacrifice according to that which is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. But that's not what the law of the Lord said, according to the King James. It said turtles, not turtle doves. If I treated the King James the way King James onlyists treat the New King James or the ESV, I would proclaim this an insufferable contradiction, proof that the King James Version cannot be trusted. What's worse, the Hebrew word in Leviticus clearly means turtle dove and not turtle. So, did the King James translators change God's word in order to introduce a contradiction? No, of course not. The OED shows what you might expect by now, that there is a rare or archaic sense of turtle, meaning turtle dove. False friend 113, delicacies. Revelation 18:3 speaks of the whore of Babylon. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. You know what delicacies are. A delicacy is a choice or expensive food, like, caviar or something. Asparagus was considered a delicacy by the ancient Greeks, or so says my dictionary. But those Greeks had a word for that, presumably, and that's not the Greek word that John used. The one he chose meant sensuality or luxury. Delicacies are something you enjoy when you are in luxury, but delicacies are food. And that's not what this Greek word refers to, quite clearly. It's more general, referring to pleasures for all the senses. Why did the King James translators choose delicacies then? Because, can you guess by now? The word used to be able to mean indulgence in, love of, or addiction to luxury or pleasure, self-indulgence. That sense is now obsolete, says the OED. Indeed, modern translations say that the merchants of the earth grow rich through her pleasures, her sensuality, or her luxuries. And they're not disagreeing with the King James Version. They're saying the very same thing in a different English to a different audience. False friend 114, grudge. Sometimes the King James uses the word grudge just the way we do. Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. Leviticus 19:18. A grudge is a persistent feeling of ill will or resentment resulting from a past insult or injury. It was bad in 1611 and it's bad today. But the wicked in Psalm 59:15 are described with this word grudge, and it sounds a little funny. I mean, does it to your ears? The wicked are pictured as dogs here. Let them wander up and down for meat, and grudge if they be not satisfied. It sounds like the passage is saying that the wicked get angry and resentful if they don't get food. That's an odd but not impossible thing to say. But the Hebrew word that the King James translators translated grudge doesn't mean to bear a grudge or to be resentful. It means to murmur or complain. Interestingly, the Geneva Bible actually sticks with the Masoretic text, saying, "Surely they shall not be satisfied, though they tarry all night." That's what the Masoretic text says. But the King James goes with the Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate, and it amends the Masoretic text by elongating one letter physically. I mean, it makes it longer, and you thereby get the word for murmur or complain, which makes better contextual sense. Hold that thought. The King James New Testament also uses grudge. "Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door." It sure sounds like the King James is saying not to hold a grudge against others. But as with the Hebrew word in Psalm 59, the Greek word in James here just doesn't mean hold a grudge or be resentful. It means grumble. As you should have learned to expect by now, the King James translators got this right both times, both verses I've raised. The word grudge used to be able to mean grumble or complain, depending on the context. Here's the OED. Intransitive, to murmur, to utter complaints, murmuringly, to grumble, complain, to be discontented or dissatisfied. This sense is now obsolete. The OED actually lists Psalm 59:15 in the King James Version as an example use of this sense. This is most definitely a false friend. False friend 115. Other. This one is subtle, but it definitely misleads. Paul in 1 Corinthians 14, of all places, gives these instructions. Let the prophets speak 2 or 3, and let the other judge. What other? The other what? Well, it would have to be the other prophet. But that's not what Paul said. He used a plural word in Greek, others, not other. Surprise, the OED says that the apparently singular word other used to be used with plural sense. This use is obsolete, they say. 2 quick reflections. First, think of someone today who insists that they and their are always plural. It just is, they say. They can't imagine a linguistic situation in which what is marked as plural in the English textbooks that they used as children is actually used in the singular. And yet it is. I just did it. And many of you didn't notice because it's so common in spoken English. Now, this has nothing to do with they-them pronouns, by the way. I reject that. I'm talking about a totally different linguistic issue. Second, here's the thing. Over and over and over again, I encounter these minor oddities and points of confusion, and it turns out that they're not random. They're not just the way the Bible people talked. They're the way the Elizabethan people talked. And we're not quite getting it. People who love the King James, and not just King James onlyists, love to talk as if the English of the King James is simply higher and better and more majestic than the English of today. But they rarely get specific and concrete. I spent way too much time chipping away at specific pieces of concrete to buy the idea that Elizabethan English is better than now English. Both are good. Both could be done poorly. There's just no way that saying other instead of others is higher and more accurate and more majestic. Other isn't lower and less accurate either. It's just different. It's the way the Elizabethans did things. And I don't think it's realistic, or more importantly, right, to insist that today's readers learn Elizabethan forms in order to understand their Bibles, when contemporary forms would be just fine. In fact, in this place, just one letter different. False friend 116, admiration. Revelation 17:5-6 says that upon the forehead of the great whore of Babylon was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. John then says, And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. If you've never been taught to fish for false friends, I have to think you will wonder why in the world John would look at the great whore of Babylon with admiration. If you've been taught, you'll know intuitively that language change just has to be playing a role here. And it is. The Greek word here means a wonder or a marvel, but admiration in today's English means respect and warm approval, according to the New Oxford American Dictionary. Did John respect and warmly approve of the great whore? You could admire one small thing in a bigger thing that overall you find atrocious, like admiring the cinematography in a beer commercial or by Leni Riefenstahl. Is that what's happening here? The sharpest King James onlyists regularly say to me that my false friends are, I can just directly quote them, they're easily discerned from context. If any of them is, this one is. Quite clearly, admiration here just cannot have meant in 1611 what it means today. But what did it mean? I'm not sure context will tell all readers. Maybe some, maybe lots, I don't know. And neither do you. And neither do King James onlyists. The OED tells us what admiration could mean in 1611. The action or an act of wondering or marveling. Wonder, astonishment, surprise. This sense, they say, is now rare. The OED actually cites this very passage in the King James Version. All the modern translations go with amazement, astonishment, or something like those. That is an accurate reflection of the Greek in our English, as admiration was in Elizabethan English. False friend 117. Observe. This false friend comes from my right-hand man, Caleb Richardson, who actually ran across it in a debate over King James onlyism. Apparently, the non-King James only guy thought that this was an error in the King James. It wasn't. See if you can get this one from context. For Herod feared John, that's John the Baptist, knowing that he was a just man and an holy, and observed him. And when he heard him, he did many things, and heard him gladly. What does observe mean here? It sure seems, given the context, that it means to watch someone or something carefully and attentively. But that's not what the Greek word means. It means to preserve against harm or ruin, to protect, defend. The Greek says that Herod kept John the Baptist safe. That's what the modern translations say too. This just has to be a false friend. But really, observe once meant kept safe? Can language change that much? Yes, the OED says that the word could once mean to watch over, look after, keep safe. The OED labels this sense as obsolete. And you are never getting this one from context. Never. False friend 118, lust. Lust appears nearly 50 times in the King James, and some of them sound a little odd to our ears, our modern English ears, don't they? God says to the Jews regarding sacrifices in Jerusalem, if the place which the Lord thy God hath chosen to put his name there, that's Jerusalem, be too far from thee, he means for you to travel to for this particular feast, then thou shalt kill of thy herd and of thy flock which the Lord hath given thee, as I have commanded thee, and thou shalt eat in thy gates whatsoever thy soul lusteth after. Lusteth. That's usually a sinful desire, isn't it? Why would the King James say this? Is that what the Hebrew says? Or take Romans 7:7. This tripped me up a bit as a King James reader, I remember. Nay, I had not known sin but by the law, for I had not known lust except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. As a young red-blooded male teenager reading Romans and having the internet in my room, which wasn't wise even in the 90s, that sounded funny. I expected I had not known lust except the law had said, thou shalt not commit adultery. Lust as a noun taken by itself with no qualifiers always means sexual desire in my English. But some King James contexts in which lust gets used just can't mean that. In the Song of Moses in Exodus 15 after the Red Sea crossing, I think the word lust still makes good enough sense in the King James. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil, my lust shall be satisfied upon them. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. The main current sense of lust just doesn't work here. It's rather unclear, to say the least, how very strong sexual desire characterized Pharaoh and his army. I mean, maybe it did, but the text doesn't say that. While they were chasing their escaped slaves, is that what they were after? I assume, therefore, that many readers will realize that lust here does not mean sexual desire. Now, English still has bloodlust and lust for power, but something I've noticed over and over again is that people, including me, because I'm a people, don't make these little connections to existing uses when the sense that is uppermost in their minds is powerful and makes tolerably good sense. The word lust in the King James generally translates Hebrew and Greek words that mean desire, not specifically sexual desire. So why do the King James translators use lust and not just desire? Because the word lust in 1611 generally meant strong desire, and not specifically strong sexual desire. The OED gives a sentence from 1586 that we just couldn't say in our English. Listen to this. He that never lusted to help others was not now able to help himself. To me, this kind of sentence is the acid test. You just know that you would never read in any newspaper or book today, he lusted to help his brother, but he had no money. You cannot say that and expect to be understood. Lust isn't always a false friend in the King James, but it often is. False friend 119, world. I don't remember who suggested this one to me, but I know I was at first skeptical. Many English-only Bible students know that world is sometimes used to translate the Greek word cosmos in the New Testament, and sometimes to translate the Greek word aion. The first word, cosmos, means something like the world system. The second means age, like a historical time period. But we have a word for that. We have age. And that's the word that modern translations tend to use in the kinds of verses that I'm thinking of for this particular false friend, such as Matthew 13:39, the enemy that sowed them is the devil, the harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. The ESV says instead that the harvest is the end of the age, where the King James has the world to come. The ESV will have the age to come. To me, the world to come and the end of the world make me picture, this world is ending and we're going to get a new earth, a new globe to replace the old. That's what the phrase has always done in my mind, because world in my English means all of the people, societies, and institutions on the earth. By contrast, the age to come sounds like a new time period on the same globe. Why world in the King James Version and age in the ESV? Why the difference? Because the English word world used to be able to mean age. This is subtle, but it's clear. If your English ear is tuned to contemporary English, and it is, I promise you, then you will encounter these sentences as odd to the point of impossible. Here's a sentence from 1587. The heaven goeth about continually, and so many worlds and ages as have been, we perceive no alteration at all. I find that odd, and not just the accent. We do still talk about the ancient world, and the difference between world and age is not stark in a usage like that. But something doesn't fit with that use of world that I just read to you. It's even more obvious with this sentence from Richard Hooker, written around 1600. Adam and all the fathers before Christ, till Christ's coming, were for so many worlds together detained. That was Richard Hooker's accent, I happen to know. We just wouldn't say that. No, we would say ages. They were detained for ages. And the OED indeed has the right sense and marks it obsolete. An age or extended period of time in human or earthly existence or history, in plural ages. We King James readers get used to the way the King James does things, and because we hear it from our earliest days, we never know to think, that's funny. But clearly the King James translators faced a different linguistic situation than we have today when it comes to this word world. Now, in 7 places, the ESV does use world to translate aion. Still, I'm in the awkward place of saying that I don't think this is wrong per se, but this false friend, like apple of the eye, is still basically understandable, in these passages at least, because world isn't that different from age, but it is different. There's a component of meaning here that was clear to the King James's original readers that isn't clear to us. There's a reason why the ESV uses world to translate aion far fewer times than does the King James Version. And there's a reason why the NIV does so even less often. False friend 120, reigns. This is a good one. Me and Adrian Rogers both missed this one, and in the same way and for the same reason. The psalmist says in Psalm 139, a psalm that was really precious to me in my youth and still is today, "For thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb." I know what reins are. They're the leather straps that allow you to guide a horse. The psalmist is using an obscure but rich metaphor, saying that God holds the reins of his heart, right? That's what Adrian Rogers thought, at least.
I want you to say this. God has a wonderful purpose or plan for me. Look, if you will, now in verses 13 through 16. For thou hast possessed my reins. What does that mean? What are my reins? Well, the reins of a horse, or what guides it. Thou hast covered me in my mother's womb.
The Hebrew word, however, does not mean a long, narrow strap attached at one end to a horse's bit, typically used in pairs to guide or check a horse while riding or driving. It means kidneys. Reins means kidneys, or it did. The Lord has possessed my kidneys. That's what David said. My contemporary dictionary doesn't even contain this sense of reins. The OED does, of course, however. It marks the whole entry, actually, as now archaic and poetic. Reins didn't just mean kidneys, though. In the Old Testament, the kidneys are used as the part of the body in which the feelings and affections and passions are thought to reside. In a way, I love you with all my heart picks just as arbitrary a body part as the kidneys. Our feelings no more reside in our left and right ventricles or in our aortic valves than they do in our blood-filtering doohickeys. You can say, if people would only read enough poetry and literary fiction, they'd get this word. You can say, it's a terrible shame that widespread ignorance is dumbing down the Bible, removing the perfectly good word reins. You can say, people ought to realize what reins means from context and from the phrase we still use to refer to kidneys in medical jargon, that is, renal failure. You can say all of that, or you can translate the Bible into language that the very vulgar, as the King James translators called them, can actually understand. You can say all that, or you can give the Bible to the plowboy. False Friend 121, dispensation. Now this one's tough. It's hard for me to predict precisely how many people know the word dispensation and what they think it means in any given context. But consider two verses. Paul says to the Corinthians, "If I preach the gospel willingly, I have a reward. But if against my will, a dispensation of the gospel is committed unto me." That's 1 Corinthians 9:17. Paul says something similar to the Colossians. He says, "I am made a minister according to the dispensation of God, which is given to me for you, to fulfill the word of God." That's Colossians 1:25. The New Oxford American Dictionary says that dispensation today can mean exemption from a rule or usual requirement. That dictionary gives this sample sentence. Although she was too young, she was given special dispensation to play 2 matches. This dictionary says, similarly, that the word dispensation can mean today permission to be exempted from the laws or observances of the church. The sample sentence that they give is, he received papal dispensation, obviously this is the Roman Catholic Church, papal dispensation to hold a number of benefices. The kind of reader who knows this sense of dispensation will probably realize that it doesn't make good sense in the context in which it's found in the 2 King James verses I read. I can imagine that someone might think Paul was getting some sort of exemption, like maybe he's going to get a reward even if he preaches the gospel unwillingly because he was given an exception, a dispensation. If you think I'm stretching things, you have not listened to enough King James readers offer their, gut-level interpretations of given obscurities. I don't have direct evidence that anyone has been guilty of the particular misreading that I might expect here, but I would be very surprised if no one ever has. Commenters, help me out. Have you ever read these verses this way or heard anyone else do so? The New Oxford American Dictionary has another sense of dispensation that gets a little closer to the intent of the King James translators. Here it is. Dispensation can mean a system of order, government, or organization of a nation, community, etc., especially as existing at a particular time. And here's a sample sentence. Scholarship is conveyed to a wider audience than under the old dispensation. The New Oxford American Dictionary even knows about dispensationalism, saying that dispensation today can mean, in Christian theology, a divinely ordained order prevailing at a particular period of history. They give this example, the Mosaic dispensation. I feel certain that that was not the kind of dispensation that Paul was talking about in the passages I read. And when I went online to see if I could find a King James preacher who misunderstood this, I did find a guy in a very strongly dispensationalist group who nonetheless misunderstood Paul's wording in a way that I didn't anticipate. He was very critical of the way that modern versions rendered 1 Corinthians 9:17 in particular. He took the word dispensation to mean dispensing, as in distributing or providing a service or information to a number of people. Watch this clip.
There is a special deposit of truth that's been given to the Apostle Paul for him to dispense. And the word dispensation just means dispensing. And there has been bodies of truth that God has revealed to other men in the past that they are to dispense. When Noah was told to build an ark and he became a preacher of righteousness, he was dispensing the truth that God was going to judge the world.
That interpretation is impossible, as the Greek clearly shows. The word dispensation cannot mean dispensing in 1 Corinthians 9:17, but this interpretation was made possible by the obscurity of this word. That's what I think, dispensation. Who knows what error people will make when the correct sense of a given word just isn't current anymore in our English. The Greek word here, translated dispensation in these two passages, means stewardship or administration. And of course, there's an archaic sense of the word dispensation in English that meant, past tense, just this, as the OED reveals: the orderly administration of things committed to one's charge, the function or office of administrator or steward, stewardship. This is labeled as archaic. There is a highly learned paragraph in the OED explaining in incredibly insightful and economical detail the history and interplay of the Greek and English regarding this word dispensation. And the Greek is oikonomos or oikonomia, I'm sorry. Maybe I should do a video about it in the future. It's of interest even apart from the King James debate. But this wasn't just a technical sense of dispensation used by theologians. It was used in normal English. In 1647, one S. Timms wrote in what I believe was a will, I guess, "According to the will of him whose steward I am, and to whom I must give an account of the dispensation of that which he hath committed unto me," etc., etc. This isn't a theological context, as best I can tell. It's a legal context. And here, dispensation is clearly used to mean stewardship. So, not only are the modern versions not wrong to speak of being entrusted with a stewardship or discharging a trust, they're also not disagreeing with the King James. They're merely translating the Bible into a different English, our English. False friend 122. Hail. I think you need to know that I approach proposed false friends with a mix of interest and skepticism every time someone sends one to me. So it is with hail. My first reaction with this one was especially skeptical. But then I heard a story of how precisely someone misunderstood it, and my interest was piqued. Now, this is a massive video, maybe the biggest one I've ever scripted, over 20,000 words, and this portion of the script is actually being written on Christmas Day. I'm pushing hard to get done by the end of the year, and I'm worried that I'm going to get sick at this point in writing. Thankfully, I haven't so far, because I'm the last person in my family not to get the flu. My 13-year-old, my poor girl, was actually sick on Christmas. I've got to push hard, even on Christmas. So here's a Christmas verse using hail. "And the angel came in unto her, and said, Hail, thou that art highly favored. The Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women." That's Luke 1:28. What does hail mean? My contemporary dictionary tells me that to hail someone is to acclaim them enthusiastically as being a specified thing. The sample sentence: "He has been hailed as the new James Dean." And this is how some people have taken "Hail, thou that art highly favored." Think of Hail Mary, a particular football pass I myself probably threw when I was a quarterback back in junior high. In my judgment, Hail Mary, which in Latin is Ave Maria, went from being a greeting in the Greek to being a very definite phrase of worship, of praise. So many songs in the Latin Mass tradition are written using this text, Ave Maria. It's sort of like Hosanna. The literal meaning of each is not praise. The latter, Hosanna, meant save now, but on the lips of actual people over time, they came to mean praise and worship. To be clear again, in the Greek, as in the Latin, this word originally was a simple greeting. It was maybe a little nicer than hello. It was something more like, salutations. That is, its actual root had meaning. It was rejoice. But as in Latin, so in English, my dictionary tells me that hail so-and-so has passed from greeting to acclaim, like the phrase Hail Caesar and like the phrase Heil Hitler. Heil is the German form of hail. People didn't say Hail Caesar and Heil Hitler and Hail to the Chief, to Caesar and Hitler and the U.S. president respectively. They weren't greeting Caesar and Hitler and the president. They were praising them. So Hail, thou who art highly favored has come to mean, as the OED says, reverential salutation. Here's the tricky part. Let me read the whole OED definition for the relevant sense of this word, hail. An exclamation of greeting or salutation, now poetic and rhetorical, and usually implying respectful or reverential salutation. Latin, ave salve. The tricky word is now. When was the word not respectful or even reverential? did the King James translators choose a word that for them meant greetings to so-and-so, or had it already come to mean praise be to so-and-so? I'm going to take that now to mean that the word has shifted over time, as has the Latin, apparently. I take for evidence also the facts that A, the Greek word meant greeting and not reverential greeting or reverential salutation, and B, modern translations don't say hail, they say greetings. The one translation that I regularly check from the last 50 years that has Gabriel hailing Mary rather than merely greeting Mary is, guess who? The Catholic New American Bible. David Todd is the one who suggested this false friend to me, and he in turn relayed a story from Bill Mounce that I just didn't have time to track down about a question that Mounce once received. The questioner misunderstood this particular greeting, Hail Mary, and inferred a high status for Mary based on the angel's reverence for her. I don't think this is what the King James translators intended. It's subtle, but I think we have a false friend. False friend 123, grief or grieve. This is another one that I was skeptical of until I looked at the details. A book that I've had for years that I clearly should have spent more time with. I mean, this is kind of terrible. How did I not do more with this? The King James Bible Word Book by Bridges and Weigel tells the story. They say the basic meaning of the Hebrew is vexation or anger in such passages as, and they list a few. They note that the Hebrew means bitterness in yet other passages, and loathing or disgust in yet others, dread in others, physical attack in others, discomfort in others. Let's just pick one clear example. In Job 2:13, Job's friends come and sit down with him on the ground for 7 full days and nights. Can you imagine that? They don't even speak a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. This makes perfect sense. Who would not experience deep sorrow, especially that caused by someone's death? That's what the New Oxford American Dictionary says. Grief means if they lost all their children, plus servants that they surely knew and loved. Only the Hebrew word doesn't mean grief in the sense of sorrow. It means pain. The King James translators, in fact, translate this word with pain at least once. You know the drill by now. There are at least 2 senses of grief in the OED that fit here. One is physical pain or discomfort. This sense is, of course, obsolete. And listen to this sample use from 1621. Hardness and grief in the left hypochondry. We just couldn't say this in our English. My knees have been hurting me a bit from overmuch ultimate frisbee at age 44 in the wintertime, but I've never said to my wife, Yea, my good mistress, pray bring hither thine heating pad, for my knee doth experience grief. Here's another sense the King James translators could have had in mind. A bodily injury or ailment, a morbid affection of any part of the body, a sore, wound, a blemish of the skin, a disease, sickness. Job, of course, had boils at this point in the story. That sense, too, is obsolete. Or maybe hurt, harm, mischief, or injury done or caused by another, damaged, inflicted, or suffered, molestation, trouble, offense. I don't know. I do know that the King James translators knew the difference between sorrow and pain. The two are obviously related, but they're not the same. Speaking of sorrow, reading the King James Bible Word Book is such a sorrow to me. I'm sorry to go down a rabbit trail, but I gotta. It's a thick book full of linguistic detail describing word after archaic King James word. Nobody should have to do that kind of work like the kind of work I've done so assiduously for so many years, and this is the last bit of it. Maybe 1 million words typed out, shot, edited, with a little editing help at times from others to whom I'm grateful. This kind of work isn't necessary for readers of the Tyndale New Testament because they know who they are, and they've chosen on purpose to read an older text, fully expecting unfamiliar English. But a lot of King James readers, and they're the ones I'm here for, they just think of the King James as the Bible, and they don't realize that it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this hard. They could read the Bible in their own English instead. False friend 124, minister. In Matthew 20:26, Jesus says to his disciples, Whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. To us, a minister is a member of the Protestant clergy. That sense kind of fits in Ephesians 3:7, where Paul says he was made a minister, and in certain countries, a minister is a government official, like the prime minister or the defense minister. Is it even possible that anyone in the history of the English-speaking world has ever read the phrase in Galatians 2 asking if Christ is the minister of sin and concluded that it was referring to his governmental post, sort of like the Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice that I think they have in Iran? But the Greek word here in these places just means servant. And minister now makes this simple verse needlessly difficult, at least for some, I think many King James readers. Jesus is telling his disciples to serve one another. Paul was made a servant of the gospel. Christ was being said not to be the servant of sin. The OED shows that the word in 1611, the word minister, could mean servant. It could mean a servant, an attendant, a person who waits upon or ministers to the wants of another. That sense is marked obsolete. Minister may be one of the King James false friends that people get used to. I think it is. I think I did. I think I understood it, I guess. But it's a totally unnecessary burden for readers. At the very least, King James readers ought to have a modern version handy so they can see that minister means servant in some contexts. False friend 125. We're about halfway through, folks. The word scholar shows up twice in the King James. I'm going to read one of the instances. And they cast lots, ward against ward, as well the small as the great, the teacher as the scholar. A very good reader who intuitively feels chiastic Hebrew modes of expression will sense that something is off here. There's a contrast, small versus great, then great versus small. Only teacher is small compared to scholar, right? But the contrast is not huge. Why would you make a contrast between scholars and teachers? Scholars almost always are teachers. Not all teachers are scholars. That's the only difference. So maybe it's small versus great, small versus great. The Hebrew word here, however, doesn't mean scholar at all. It means student, pupil, learner. But scholar in our English means a specialist in a particular branch of study, especially the humanities. It means a distinguished academic. That's why I don't call myself a scholar, by the way, out there. Scholar does have an archaic sense listed in my contemporary dictionary. It means student. And of course, the OED backs this up. Scholar used to be used to refer to students, even kids. You could be an illiterate little scholar back in the day. Today, that would be a contradiction in terms. Although I do wonder sometimes about certain scholars. Can they read? In my experience, scholar is still used to mean student often enough in older books that we still read, like Jane Austen novels. I even checked this, that many educated people will realize that scholar here in the King James did not mean expert, but student. But many won't realize this. And I found an easy solution. Revise or update the translations so that it uses an accurate word everyone will know. Scholar is a false friend. And in one other place, too, that will serve as a handoff to our next false friend. The Lord will cut off the man that doeth this, the master and the scholar, out of the tabernacles of Jacob. That's Malachi 2:12. False friend 126 is master. Master is a false friend that isn't always a false friend. The first time it appears, it's not. And the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master, and sware to him concerning that matter. There, master meant in 1611 what it means today, a man who has people working for him, especially servants or slaves. That's what Abraham was. But the master and the scholar doesn't mean the slave owner and the teacher. It actually meant the teacher and the student. Master often means teacher in the King James. Jesus said to Nicodemus, for example, "Art thou a master of Israel, and knowest not these things?" What Jesus meant was teacher. I and my wife both have Master of Arts degrees. Actually, I think my wife's is a Master of Science. This harks back to the older sense. But I think there are many places where modern readers just won't have enough contextual clues to realize that master in a given place in the King James actually meant teacher. I know this because I was such an one. I read the Gospels more than most other portions of Scripture as a young Christian, especially the Gospel of Matthew, as I recall. And I repeatedly saw the disciples calling Jesus Master. The Pharisees used this terminology too in the King James. And the Pharisees said unto his disciples, "Why eateth your master with publicans and sinners?" I always took that as authority figure, or as my contemporary dictionary puts it, a man in charge of an organization or group. But once you know that master can mean teacher, that indeed the King James translators frequently use the word master to translate the Greek word for teacher, then sentences like this make more sense. Here it is. The disciple is not above his master, nor the servant above his Lord. Disciples have teachers, not masters. The King James is not in error, however, because as the OED clearly reveals, master used to be able to mean teacher. A hypothesis worth exploring, perhaps master stopped meaning teacher or started to mean it a lot less, in large part because of the many contexts when the two major senses, that is teacher and slave owner, could actually be confused. Language doesn't like that. It tries to find distinction between words. That's because language is not a set of words. It's a set of relationships among words. Master is a frequent false friend in the King James. False friend 127, mean. I remember a college teacher of mine who happened to be my parents' next-door neighbor, quoting to me Proverbs 22:29 at 27 Blythewood Drive, where I used to live in Greenville, South Carolina. He said to me, "Seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before mean men." He was suggesting that I use that verse as a sort of guideline, a promise, and I have. It's not up to me to say whether or not this has come true, but I can say that I have, by God's grace, tried to live by this wisdom. But, who would want to stand before mean men? Me, apparently. You can see these mean men commenting on nearly every single one of my videos, like the King James only guy whose comment I woke up to on Christmas morning, whose observation was that I have demonic eyes. That's a new one. Like the many King James onlyists who took to YouTube and Facebook to cruelly and viciously attack me in highly personal and offensive ways after my debate with my good brother Dan Hafley, who certainly did not do those things. To my knowledge, I returned railing for railing, that's reviling for reviling, precisely 0 times. But the whole experience made me wish I'd been more diligent in my business so I could stand before kings instead of such mean men. I take comfort, however, in the promise in Isaiah, "And the mean man shall be brought down." Any King James onlyists who have watched this far may be very upset right now. They might be practically shouting at the screen, "That's not what mean men means." And they'd be right. In this case, they'd even have contemporary dictionaries on their side. Yes, mean men can mean men who are vicious or aggressive in behavior. That's what I was joking about earlier. But good readers will know that mean men here means inferior or poor men, or possibly even men of low birth or social class. Or rather, that's what the word mean meant. People use context to help them decide which sense of a given word fits. I say they use context to decide, but of course this nearly always happens silently, instantaneously, and below the level of conscious thought. Vicious or aggressive men shall be brought down is, I judge, far more likely to be the meaning that lots of contemporary English speakers will get out of that promise in Isaiah than the proper meaning, which is like low men, base men. He will not stand before inferior or poor men, will only occur to the best readers. And the OED says that this sense of low social status, not of the nobility or gentry, is now rare except in the superlative, and chiefly hyperbolically. What they're talking about is phrases like this: even the meanest clerk expected to employ at least a resident maid of all work. Now, if the Spirit chose a difficult, obscure sense of a Hebrew word that many of Solomon's original readers just, wouldn't have known, then mean men may be the very best translation for today. And with Hebrew, we don't always know. This Hebrew word in Proverbs 22:29, you'll not stand before mean men, occurs only here. A judgment call has to be made. I tend to want to err on the side of accessibility, given that edification requires intelligibility. Mean may not be a false friend for every King James reader, but find me the average person who can understand it. And I'll find you a lot more who can't, but who can understand the Christian Standard Bible here. Do you see a person skilled in his work? He will stand in the presence of kings. He will not stand in the presence of the unknown. False friend 128, freely. In 2 Corinthians 11:7, Paul says, "Have I committed an offense in abasing myself that ye might be exalted, because I have preached to you the gospel of God freely?" What does freely mean here? In contemporary English, in a context like this one, I think it means willingly and readily, without compulsion, as in, I freely confess to this failing. I get all that from my contemporary dictionary, the New Oxford American. I mean, right? Isn't that what you get out of it? In Numbers 11:5, the Israelite ex-slaves say, "We remember the fish which we did eat in Egypt freely, the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic." What does freely mean here? In contemporary English, in contexts like these, freely means in copious or generous amounts, as in, she drank freely to keep up her courage. That's from the New Oxford. I mean, right? Isn't that what you get out of it? But that's not what freely meant in those two passages in 16:11. The Greek word Paul used means as a gift, for free, without payment, free of charge, gratis. The Hebrew word that Moses used in the passage I read means the same thing. It's used in passages like the one in which Laban, for example, says to Jacob, "Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught?" Did the King James translators get this wrong? "Hast thou been with me so long, and wottest thou not what I shall here say?" Do they ever get it wrong in my False Friends videos? Nope. The OED reveals that the word used to be able to mean without payment or cost, gratis. This sense, they say, is now rare. Paul preached the gospel without pay. The Israelites got food without having to pay for it. That's what freely means in these two King James passages, or that's what it meant. Now, this is not a false friend everywhere it occurs, but I did find it in at least one other utterly key verse. Being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. That's the all-important Romans 3:24. When modern translations say that we are justified as a gift, they're not disagreeing with the King James, but instead saying the same thing, just to a different audience that speaks a different English. False friend 129, doubts. In two places in Daniel, the King James uses doubts in a way that I just don't think modern readers are going to get. An excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel. And Belshazzar, who's given this report about Daniel, then later says to Daniel after he summons him, I have heard of thee, that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. To modern readers, this sure sounds like the text is saying that Daniel can make doubting people believe stuff. A doubt is a feeling of uncertainty or lack of conviction. But of course, that meaning does not fit well in the context of Daniel 5. And the Hebrew word here means something like knotty, K-N-O-T-T-Y, problems. What did the King James translators mean by dissolving doubts? The OED reveals that doubt used to be able to mean a matter or point involved in uncertainty, a doubtful question, a difficulty. That sense is now obsolete. Maybe highly perceptive readers will just sort of figure this out, and maybe not. Either way, the ESV's solving problems will make more sense to readers who speak contemporary English. False friend 130, room. I once read a really sad and disturbing book called Room. The Pharisees loved rooms. They loved the uppermost rooms at the feasts and the chief seats in the synagogues. Did feasts in the ancient world take place in multi-level dwellings, and if you got to be in the top floor part of the dinner, then you were really hot stuff? What is an uppermost room? The Greek word here means the place of honor, literally the first seat. But a room in contemporary English, in a context like that one, if you didn't know, is a part or division of a building enclosed by walls, floor, and ceiling. And the OED shows that room in 1611 could mean a place or seat occupied by or assigned to a person or thing. The OED says that that sense is now obsolete. The uppermost room in 1611 English was the top seat. How is the man on the street, the one who comes to visit your church, the one who, the King James says, occupies the room of the unlearned, supposed to know all this? How many special words and special uses of still current words does he have to learn before he can understand what's going on in church or in his Bible reading? The Greek word in the 1 Corinthians 14 passage that I just referenced just means place. And yet, I'll be honest, I'm not finding a sense of room that fits this word or this passage well. It does just have to mean place. And I assume the King James translators knew 1611 English better than I do. An ex-Ruckmanite, and I mean someone who was deep into the Ruckmanite world, helped me very, very greatly with this video. He told me that he literally thought there was a room in the church called the Room of the Unlearned. If there were, a room of the unlearned, he and I would both be in it. We missed this false friend, both of us, but we would protest. It's not our fault. Practically everybody who speaks contemporary English is in this room of the unlearned with us, at least sometimes when they read the King James Version. This room of the unlearned is jam-packed. I think the King James will always produce a vast room of the unlearned. Its English just isn't our English. But I will tell you, the funnest way out of this room is to watch my videos. False friend 131, naked. After Jesus is arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, we read this in the King James. Didn't this passage ever strike you as weird? It's weird on two levels that I'm going to describe. And they all forsook him and fled. And there followed him a certain young man, having a linen cloth cast about his naked body. And the young men laid hold on him, and he left the linen cloth and fled from them naked. One oddity here is that this young man would be described in such detail and never named. That oddity doesn't stem from language change, so I will not explore it here. You can read commentaries and study Bibles. The other oddity that I always noticed, even as a teenager reading this passage, was that this young man fled away naked. I gather it's common for us humans to have dreams where we appear naked in public, but in my entire life, I've never even come remotely close to actually suffering this fate. To be naked in public, even if it's because someone grabbed a linen cloth off of me unexpectedly, is to be culpable of a lack of forethought. Yes, I have gone outside in my bathrobe to take out the trash early Monday mornings, if you must know. But if I'm going to go anywhere off my property, like to the Garden of Gethsemane or something, let's say, I'm at least going to be wearing undergarments, maybe some shorts and a t-shirt as well, underneath that bathrobe. Who in the world goes out wearing only, and really only, a linen cloth? Maybe people in ancient times were different. I mean, maybe. There's a little ambiguity in the Greek word for naked, or so says my responsible original language lexicon. It could mean not nude, totally bare, just like our word naked, but it could also mean pertaining to being lightly clad without an outer garment, without which a decent person did not appear in public. In context, this just has to be what it means in another place where the word naked appears in the King James. Therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved saith unto Peter, It is the Lord. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he girt his fisher's coat unto him, for he was naked, and did cast himself into the sea. Now, I'm not an expert in ancient Jewish culture, but I don't know. I just can't imagine that Peter worked with other men completely naked. Public nudity was a shame in Eastern culture, as the Old Testament shows, right? As it is in Western culture. The desire for clothing is intrinsic to mankind. The so-called primitives who are nearly nude have, I believe, fallen from a higher state, not recovered a more original one. And it just so happens that the word naked, according to the OED, formerly could mean wearing only an undergarment. This sense is now obsolete, the OED says. I admit to some uncertainty here. Both the Greek word in the New Testament era, the one that's often translated naked, and the English word naked in the time of the King James could mean completely nude. But not only do I not care to spend time imagining such a thing regarding the two passages I've brought up, I find it difficult to accept regarding both this anonymous young man and Peter. I think we have a false friend. Modern translations tend to agree, at least as regarding the Peter passage. They say not that Peter was naked, but that he was stripped for work. By the way, nake used to mean strip, so to be naked was to be stripped. This leaves some ambiguity. Stripped, or just having cast aside outer garments. Other modern translations remove this ambiguity, actually specifying that Peter had merely taken off his outer garment. I have to admit that the lexicon and the modern translations are not with me on the young man who fled naked from Jesus' arrest. They're not with me on my skepticism that he was really and truly totally naked. They stick with naked. I could be wrong there. With Peter and John 21:7, however, on balance and taking one thing with another, I think we've got a false friend. I don't think the King James translators meant to say that Peter was completely naked. False friend 132. Allow. Jesus told the Jewish lawyers in Luke 11, Truly ye bear witness that ye allow the deeds of your fathers, for they indeed killed them, that's the prophets, and ye build their sepulchres. In our English, that sounds like they're permitting the deeds of their fathers. To allow something is to give someone permission to do it. What it means for the great-great-great-grandchildren of the murderers of the prophets to permit their long-dead relatives to do something bad, that's a little obscure. But to allow can mean to admit that someone's activity is legal or acceptable. In contemporary English, maybe that's what Jesus meant. That's how it sounds in our English, at least. But the Greek word here does not mean permit. It means something different. It means something that makes a good deal more sense. It means to join in approval, agree with, approve of, consent to, sympathize with. So why did the King James translators say allow? Because in 1611, the word allow could mean to approve of, sanction, to receive with favor or approval. The OED, of course, marks this sense as obsolete. We have a false friend. Quickly, Paul says in the very challenging chapter, Romans 7, That which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that do I not. But what I hate, that do I. Paul sounds like he's saying, what I do not permit. But effectively, all modern translations say, what I do not understand. And the verb there is the standard Greek verb for knowing or understanding. Honestly, I'm at a loss as to why the King James translators used the word allow. I pored over the OED entry for allow, and I just don't get what the King James translators were trying to say. I'm open to your input out there in YouTube land. The interpretation of language is not an exact science. Sometimes I do simply fail, especially with older English that just isn't my heart language. False friend 133 is disallow. Disallow is a fussy word. 1 Peter 2:4 in the King James uses it to speak of Jesus, who is a living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of God and precious. I think most readers today will take the word disallow here this way. Transitive, to refuse to accept or acknowledge as reasonable, true, or valid. To disregard or dismiss the significance of. To refuse to admit intellectually. And that's not totally off the mark, but it's not totally on it. The Greek word here means to regard as unworthy, unfit, and therefore to be rejected, reject. And it just so happens that the OED lists a sense of disallow that meant this very thing. Transitive, to refuse to accept with favor or approval, to reject. The OED marks this sense as obsolete. Look inside this sense, and you'll see that 1 Peter 2:4 is actually cited. The OED cites Tyndale's 1526 New Testament. In a way, all we need to see is that this very usage, the one in 1 Peter 2:4, is cited in the OED under an obsolete sense. That's usually enough to cause us to expect misunderstanding. As it is, the matter is complicated by the clear demands of the context. You just know, reading 1 Peter 2, that disallowed here has to mean something negative and bad that men did to Jesus because of the contrast that Peter is setting up with how God regarded him versus how man did. This matter is made even more complex by the fact that disallow is one of those fussy words that pedants like to point to as having a very specific meaning that must be protected at all costs. So some people will be certain that disallow means to refuse to declare valid, and that it belongs almost solely in formal and judicial contexts. The judge disallowed his evidence. The best thing to do today is just to use the simple word reject that everyone will know, even the plowboy. False friend 134, table. Paul tells the Corinthians, "Ye are manifestly declared to be the epistle of Christ ministered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not in tables of stone, but in fleshy tables of the heart." What is a table of stone? Now that's easy. It's a table made of stone, like the one on which Aslan was murdered by the White Witch in Narnia, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But what is a fleshy table of the heart? This presents a more difficult linguistic challenge. That would be quite the metaphor. The Greek word here actually doesn't mean table at all, however. It means tablet. One imagines that the two words are related because both present a flat surface in a rectangular shape, but surely there are languages out there where the word for table, like I've got right here, you can't see it in the video, and the word for tablet, which I don't have right here, I left mine at home, are completely different. Like Spanish, with its mesa for table and tabla for tablet. Like New Testament Greek, where the two words are completely different. Modern dictionaries tell me that table can still mean a slab of wood or stone bearing an inscription. But the OED calls this sense archaic. We're going too fast for me to check a linguistic corpus, but do I really have to do that here? Don't you just know deep in your scone-clogged English heart that many people today are going to be confused by tables here in the King James? Isn't it obvious that tablets would be better for speaking to the plowboy in a way he can understand? I use scientific linguistic methods in my videos, but I don't usually do that when editing. I just know the way things are supposed to sound when I edit someone else's writing because I'm a native English speaker. I feel confident that the ESV is much easier to understand here. Just listen to it. And you show that you are a letter from Christ, delivered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. The metaphor Paul uses is an arresting and beautiful one, but many King James readers today, I'm confident they're going to miss it. I predict this because of language change. False friend 135, amaze. Judges 20:41. And when the men of Israel turned again, the men of Benjamin were amazed, for they saw that evil was come upon them. The Hebrew word here does not mean amazed. However, it means to be horrified or terrified, to be greatly frightened. My contemporary dictionary tells me that to amaze means to surprise someone greatly, to fill with astonishment. Again, this is what it means in contemporary English. You knew that. This sense of amaze definitely fits in Matthew 19:25 when the disciples are exceedingly amazed about Jesus' statement that it's difficult for a rich man to be saved at all. They're surprised, they're astonished that Jesus would say such an unexpected and counterintuitive thing. That's what the Greek says too. That's what the context demands, and that's what the English means. The word amazed isn't always a false friend of the King James. But that surprised meaning of amazed is more than a beat off in Judges 20:41. The men of Benjamin were not surprised, they were terrified. Sure enough, the OED shows that amaze could once mean to fill a person with fear, panic, or alarm, to terrify. The OED lexicographers mark this sense as, you guessed it, obsolete and chiefly poetic in later use. False Friend 136, comfortably. It's beginning to look less like Christmas everywhere you go, and one thing that fades quickly from the scene once we pass December 25th, which I have now done, I'm recording this on the 27th, is performances of Handel's Messiah. I caught one in Seattle last year with friends who have season tickets, brought my little daughter, and it was just fantastic. I have much of the thing memorized. I really do love it. I've sung in the chorus. I sang one of the solos just for my music lessons years ago, and I love it because it's Bible, 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 Bible. There's one line that I remember hearing sung by a highly educated music professor at my alma mater, the man who, with his wife, led the mission team where I met my wife. Both spouses who led the team had doctorates, so we could not address either one of them as Dr. Macaulay because, they might both turn toward us. They were both Dr. Macaulay, so we called them Dr. Dad and Dr. Mom. Great memories. Dr. Dad was a highly dedicated musician who not only led music at school, but also at the church that we both attended. He had a room in his home that was set aside for music listening. It was jam-packed with CDs, floor to ceiling. I remember him singing, comfort ye, my people, saith your God. Speak ye comfortably to Jerusalem." I can't sing because I'm in a library right now. "And cry unto her that her warfare is ended." That is amazing. That's precious. Those are beautiful biblical words. And not amazing in the sense of terrifying unless you're one of Jerusalem's enemies. These words come, of course, from the King James in Isaiah chapter 40. I'm not totally sure what it means to speak comfortably. It would seem to mean that Isaiah is to speak in a way that is free from stress or tension, like a group of old friends getting together and chatting comfortably. That's from the New Oxford American Dictionary. But the modern versions don't say, "speak comfortably to Jerusalem." They say, "speak tenderly or kindly to Jerusalem." And the Hebrew phrase doesn't mean speak comfortably. The Hebrew phrase is quite literally speak to the heart. And some modern translations give that translation, as does the ancient Greek Septuagint, for what it's worth. The King James translators are either treating this speak to the heart as an idiom, or they're going a little dynamic or functional. I could see speak comfortingly to Jerusalem, but I can't get speak comfortably out of the Hebrew. Come on, OED, tell us what for. Indeed, the OED shows that comfortably used to be able to mean in a comforting way, comfortingly, consolingly, cheeringly. Isaiah 40 verse 2 is actually listed underneath this sense as a citation. And this sense is, of course, marked obsolete. We've got another false friend. The context is clear enough in Isaiah 40 verse 2 that it kind of overrides this little misunderstanding. But as I've frequently said, if the issue is so minor, how much harm can it do to revise a few letters to give the plowboy a word he will understand instead of a word he may or may not? False Friend 137 is spirit. Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 2:8 that one day shall that wicked be revealed whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. What's the spirit of his mouth? Is this some comment about the Trinity? Does the Holy Spirit reside in Jesus' mouth somehow? And if you happen to know the doctrine of the eternal procession, does he proceed from Jesus' mouth? Modern translations don't say spirit, they say breath. And the Greek word here could go either way, spirit or breath. It's the commonly known word pneuma. It's usually translated spirit in most English translations, but it also gets translated as breath or even wind in the King James when the context demands. In our English, I think the word spirit here would lead you to expect the sense, the non-physical part of a person, which is the seat of emotions and character, the soul. That's the spirit of his mouth. Or perhaps, again, we're dealing with the Holy Spirit somehow. But the OED shows that the word spirit once did mean breath, also the act of breathing, respiration. The OED says that this sense was rare after the 18th century. Whenever I see something like this, I want confirmation. I trust the OED, but I trust it to give me evidence for its assertions. Did people once really and truly use the word spirit to mean breath? Apparently so. As late as 1758, a writer could write, "Whilst life remained on the soft bosom hung of the dear maid, his last spirit breathed o'er her pale cheek." And as far back as 1481, a writer could write, "Their wisdom ascended in increasing and continued unto the late spirit of their lives." I guess they were Scottish. I just don't see that being possible in our English today. The King James translators had access to a neat little convergence where English could bear the same ambiguity that Greek did. We can't do that. This is not available to us. False friend 138, confusion. In Daniel's famous and humble prayer on behalf of exiled Israel in Daniel 9, he says, O Lord, righteousness belongeth unto thee, but unto us confusion of faces, as at this day, to the men of Judah, and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and unto all Israel that are near, and that are far off, through all the countries whither thou hast driven them, because of their trespass that they have trespassed against thee. That's Daniel 9:7. The same phrase can be found in Ezra 9:7. Bible code people, have at it. The phrase confusion of face sure seems to mean in our English a weird idiom for confusion, or very literally mixing up faces like my face on yours done in Photoshop. Or like people suddenly can't tell faces apart like they have some kind of neurological, problem. But the Hebrew word used in both verses does not mean that. It means shame. Modern translations treat this as an idiom for open shame or public shame. If the Hebrew means shame, why does the King James Version have confusion? It's because, of course, the Oxford English Dictionary reveals that confusion used to be able to mean mental discomfiture, putting to shame. In the Coverdale Bible, Psalm 31:1 reads, In thee, O Lord, is my trust. Let me never be put to confusion. By the time we get to the Bishop's Bible, we've got not put to confusion, but confounded. The King James Version translators revised this to ashamed. Is it wrong for the New King James to have done the same thing at Daniel 9:7? Confusion of face is confusing at best, a false friend at worst. False friend 139, we're on the home stretch. Sensual. Jude 19 describes certain scoffers this way. These be they who separate themselves, sensual, having not the Spirit. James 3:15 uses the same word to describe a wisdom that is not really wisdom. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. Sensual in our English means relating to or involving gratification of the senses and physical, especially sexual pleasure. A sample sentence, the production of the ballet is sensual and passionate. Is that what Jude and James meant? The Greek word that they both used means pertaining to the life of the natural world and whatever belongs to it, in contrast to the realm of experience whose central characteristic is pneuma, natural, unspiritual, worldly. How did we get from worldly or unspiritual to sensual, which is nearly no more than a beat off from sexual? I had a little trouble picking an OED sense with confidence here. I do feel confident that language change is playing a role here. No major modern English translations, except the New King James, say sensual in these places. Here's the OED sense I think the King James translators were employing: of an opinion or idea arising from material rather than intellectual or spiritual considerations, materialistic. That's the emphasis of the Greek word, too. The Oxford English Dictionary does not mark this sense as obsolete, and the entry for sensual was revised as recently as 2016. But is anyone going to get this meaning out of sensual anymore? I just don't think so. I'm willing to go out on a small limb here, at least in this passage, and say this is a false friend. Sensual nearly always means sexual in our English. If it isn't, if it doesn't mean that, it refers to gratification of the senses a little bit more generally. I think the King James translators did fine to choose this word in 1611. I absolutely do. But I think the New King James translators should not have stuck with it. I think worldly, which is the choice of many or most translators today, is better for today. If you feel this false friend is weak or unprovable, I'm sympathetic to you. Language is, as I've often said, not an exact science. I'm appealing to my own lexicographical judgment here in a way I normally don't. I usually try to use independent testimony. So if you need other examples to get you back up to 150, I have a bunch of possibilities left over that you could choose from. Now, false friend 140. Mourn. Mourn is not always a false friend. Genesis 23:2 says that Abraham mourned for Sarah after her death. And I'm getting tired. I'm going to lean on this chair, much as Jacob leaned on the staff or on his bed or something late in Genesis. Anyway, Genesis 37 says that Jacob mourned for Joseph after he thought he died. But in at least one obscure place, mourn is a false friend. Isaiah 38:14 reads, Like a crane or a swallow, so did I chatter. I did mourn as a dove. Mine eyes fail with looking upward. O Lord, I am oppressed. Undertake for me. The modern translations don't have mourn. They have moan or occasionally coo, like a dove does. The Hebrew word translated mourn here actually does mean coo, growl, mutter, read in an undertone, speak, proclaim, utter, to articulate, either verbally or with a cry, shout, or noise. My contemporary dictionary for English doesn't have a matching sense. To mourn is to feel or show deep sorrow or regret for someone or their death. I don't think doves do that. Maybe do they mate for life? I don't know. But no, what they're doing is described by the OED. To make a low, inarticulate sound indicative of grief, pain, hunger, etc. To moan, of an animal, bird, etc., to make a similar sound. The OED says that this sense of mourn is now chiefly Scottish and English regional. Did you, like me and my friend Eric Couture, assume that mourning dove with the U in it was actually mourning dove without a U, like a dove associated with the morning because it makes sounds in the morning, I guess? I think I was today years old when I noticed this error of mine. We make this mistake because we don't use the word mourning with a U, the way the King James translators did. We don't use it anymore to speak of the sounds that doves make. Hezekiah in Isaiah 38 wasn't mourning, grieving like a dove. He was moaning like one. This is a minor metaphor. Your theology will not be affected by this false friend, even if you misunderstand it. You can live a happy and full life without knowing anything about this particular false friend. Many people have done so in the history of the world, but some people haven't. And when the Spirit speaks in Scripture through Hezekiah or anyone else, I just want to understand what he says, even obscure metaphors. False friend 141, evil. Are you surprised that this simple word could be a false friend? I resisted too. Very common words based on primitive Old English roots seem to me to be pretty stable in meaning. I have a whole chapter on this word, evil, in my forthcoming book, King James Words You Don't Know, You Don't Know. I'll give even greater detail in that chapter, but I'll give a small taste here. In Daniel 9:14 we read, "Therefore hath the Lord watched upon the evil and brought it upon us, for the Lord our God is righteous in all his works, which he doeth, for we obeyed not his voice." The Lord brought evil upon them? Can the Lord be responsible for evil? Evil in our English means profoundly immoral and wicked. The Hebrew word here, and in a number of other similar places where the Lord is said to be responsible for evil, that Hebrew word can certainly mean evil or wickedness. But it can also mean something softer, misfortune, disaster, calamity. Funny enough, the OED says that the English word used to be able to mean that too, a calamity, disaster, misfortune. The sense is now marked as obsolete. Now, can the English word evil today stretch as far as the Hebrew word evil? This is a hard question. I think you can probably pick up from the context of the whole King James Bible that evil in Daniel 9 just can't mean moral wickedness. Even more bluntly, the King James has the Lord saying in Isaiah, "I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things." Again, I think it's surely possible to read the King James your whole life and never come to think, God is the author of evil, and the Bible is saying so. Your theology, your pastor, your reading of the whole Bible, and your reading of Christian books all will combine to make you resist that conclusion, despite what some might call a very clear statement, "I, the Lord, create evil." Nonetheless, if the Hebrew word can mean calamity, and if the word evil in English can't really mean calamity anymore, it surely can't be wrong for modern translations to choose that word calamity instead of evil. I think there are complexities with this false friend that I haven't untangled. Maybe I do so in the book. You'll have to buy it and find out. Call it the problem of evil. But I think language change is playing a role in our inability to fully understand the King James when it uses this word in certain places. False friend 142, comprehend. Paul in Romans 13:9 says that the commands, "Thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, and thou shalt not covet," are briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." The Greek word here means summarized or expressed more precisely, not comprehended. Comprehended in today's English normally means understood in a context like this one. The OED shows, however, that comprehend used to have a sense, now obsolete, surprise, surprise, that meant to lay hold of all the points of anything and include them within the compass of a description or expression, to embrace or describe summarily, summarize, sum up. The OED actually cites Romans 13:9 right here under this sense. Now, this is one of those places where the meaning of the word is so constrained by context that I think good readers today are often getting this. If someone is listening to that sentence in a King James audio Bible, for example, and the audio glitches for just one moment and they miss just the word comprehend, they'll just know, if they're good readers, that practically the only concept that can go in that blank is summed up or summarized. All these laws are summed up in this one, love your neighbor. All these laws are comprehended, but some poor plowboys will not comprehend. I was lucky to get to film 42 False Friends at the International Center for KJV False Friends, but heinous sabotage from the Center for taking Bible words away from the plowboy and blaming him for his failure to understand forced me to stop recording at this point. Either that or my camera battery died because I forgot to plug it into an external power source. In any case, I'm going to film the rest in the office that I'm using at home till I can gather the resources to build an office and studio in the garage. False Friend 143, Doctrine. A doctrine, in contemporary English, is a belief or set of beliefs held and taught by a church, political party, or other group. My contemporary dictionary actually gives as its sample phrase, the doctrine of predestination. Within the Christian church, we make a distinction between truths and doctrines. It is a truth that the sun stood still in Joshua 10, but it's not a doctrine. It helps support and qualify the doctrine of divine providence, of God's sustaining power in creation. Do you catch the distinction? The King James sometimes uses the word doctrine in a way that modern Christians, I think, will not expect or understand. In 1 Corinthians 14, for example, Paul gives this instruction. How is it then, brethren, when ye come together, every one of you hath a psalm, hath a doctrine, hath a tongue, hath a revelation, hath an interpretation? Let all things be done unto edifying. What would it mean in Paul's time that a particular Corinthian Christian had a doctrine? These are people who are practicing miraculous sign gifts, tongues, revelation, interpretation of tongues. Then again, psalms are on the list, so maybe these are people who feel compelled to stand up and explain an existing Christian doctrine, not reveal a new one that was just given to them, like, say, a doctrine in which Mary is now revealed to have been herself conceived without original sin, or a doctrine in which a particular Bible translation, into Urdu maybe, is revealed to be the perfect and final revelation of God, the seventh purification of all Bible translations. But then the King James uses the word doctrine in places where I don't think we would. Speaking of Jesus, the King James in Mark 4:2 says, And he taught them many things by parables, and said unto them in his doctrine. But what he goes on to say is not what we would call doctrine. It's the parable of the sower. Again, that parable teaches doctrine, but the word I'd expect here is teaching. That's what the modern versions have, and that's what the Greek word here means. It's just the standard word for teaching. The Oxford English Dictionary shows that this is precisely what doctrine used to mean in contexts like this one. The action of teaching or instructing. Instruction, a piece of instruction, a lesson, precept. This sense is marked as obsolete. So when Paul says in 2 Timothy 4:2, Preach the word, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort, with all longsuffering and doctrine, he means teaching. Maybe this will help, and I owe this insight to the sharp-eyed Isaiah Reed. Listen to the rendering that Miles Coverdale gives of Proverbs 19:27, a few decades before the King James. My son, hear no more the doctrine that leadeth thee away from the words of understanding. I think that's how Miles Coverdale talked. I think we think of doctrine as a good thing, right? I do. It has to be called false or bad for us to know that it's so, like doctrines of demons in 2 Timothy or 1 Timothy 4:4. But in the context of the Coverdale Bible that I just read, doctrine clearly has to mean teaching, considered neutrally. It's context that tells us that it's bad teaching in this case. Doctrine is a frequent false friend in the King James Version. False friend 144, Duke. There's an oddity in Genesis 36:15 in the King James, in the genealogy of Esau. These were dukes of the sons of Esau, the sons of Eliphaz, the firstborn son of Esau, Duke Teman, Duke Omar, Duke Zepho, Duke Kenaz. The text goes on to list a total of 42 dukes. What are dukes? Did they have dukes back in patriarchal days? Until this very day, I always assumed that Britain had all these hereditary titles of nobility like
Baron and Baroness, Duke and Duchess.
And they just kind of picked one that seemed to fit the status that they were seeing of these people in the genealogy of Esau and Genesis. That's what the King James translators did. In other words, they transculturated rather than merely translating. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with this. With certain classes of words, this is often done, and it's very appealing. This is what I would prefer to do. Weights, measures, coins. Think of baths and ephahs and drachmas. These words don't mean anything to us, so translations will often choose contemporary equivalents and use footnotes and a chart in the back to communicate what the text literally says. I have no problem with this, once again. I thought that's what the King James translators did with duke. The Hebrew word here, of course, does not mean a male holding the highest hereditary title in the British and certain other peerages, as the word duke invariably, always means today in our English, except in the phrase put up your dukes, which most certainly does not mean placing your British nobles on shelves for storage. The Hebrew word that the King James translates as dukes means tribal chief. When dukes was suggested to me as a false friend by the inimitable Isaiah Reed, I knew exactly what the OED had to show me for me to believe that this was a false friend. It had to show me that duke was once a general term for some kind of leader. Indeed, that's exactly what I found when I opened up the OED this very day. A leader of an army, a captain or general, a chief, ruler. This sense is, of course, obsolete. We just don't call these people dukes anymore. Duke has held on, only just barely in English. But it appears in other ways. Did you know that dukes and duct tape are etymologically related? So are induction ceremonies and conductors, and, a little more obviously, il duce. That's the Italian word for the leader. These all come from the Latin words for leading or leader. A duct leads air from one place to another. A conductor leads people together. Benito Mussolini was the leader in Italy. That's why he was called Il Duce. And dukes, in the 58 places they appear in the King James Old Testament, were precisely tribal or military leaders. False friend 145. His. I've quoted Moises Silva many times on this channel, especially one line he gave about how nearly all speakers of a language are nearly completely ignorant of the history of their own language. I think this one will shock and amaze some of you. The Oxford English Dictionary reveals that the simple word its, I-T-S, without an apostrophe, as a possessive pronoun, did not enter English until sometime after the King James was translated. It's kind of complicated because a related form did come in, but phrases like the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind were not possible when the King James translators did their work. So this is what they said instead. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind. That's Genesis 1:11. Grass in the King James too is a male plant. Herb yielding seed after his kind. Birds are male too, I guess, and every winged fowl after his kind. Read on in the King James Bible, and you'll find that candlesticks are also male. And thou shalt make a candlestick of pure gold, of beaten work shall the candlestick be made. His shaft and his branches, his bowls, his knops, and his flowers shall be of the same. Doors, too, were male. As the door turneth upon his hinges, so doth the slothful upon his bed. Of course, what we're dealing with is the way the King James translators expressed gender-indefinite pronouns. They used his as the default possessive. Will people misunderstand the above verses? I don't know. Maybe people do weird stuff with the Bible, as I well know. But this will be a bump for some readers. Anytime you encounter odd language, you either just move past it without thinking, or you try to ascribe some meaning to it. Your mind casts about for some reason why the King James Version would specify that the trees or the door or the grass were male. This takes up processing time in your mind, as it were. It slows you down. Now, that itself isn't even necessarily a bad thing, to slow down while reading the Bible, I mean. But I think it's overall bad to have to slow down over something so obscure, something that won't yield any meaning for most people, or will yield the wrong meaning for them. It's a little hard to predict what someone might get out of this, for example. And he shall lay flat the burnt offering and cut it into his pieces. Whose pieces? there are a few places where this false friend, his, could cause actual misunderstanding. Here's one. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. The beast is actually repeatedly referred to in the King James with the possessive pronoun his, when the Spirit in Greek did not inspire a masculine word but a neuter one. The Spirit, in other words, chose to call the beast an it. Does this have significance? Maybe, maybe not. But if it does, you're not going to get it while reading the King James Version. Unless you know that where we would say its, they would say his. False friend 146, generation. When Jesus calls the Pharisees, among other names, ye generation of vipers, what did he mean? To me, in my English, in a context like this one, a generation of vipers is all of the people born and living at about the same time regarded collectively, and they're all a bunch of vipers. Or they, as a group, are characterized by viper-like behavior. But the Greek word here does not mean that. It means that which is produced or born of living creatures, child or offspring. What Jesus is saying when he calls the Pharisees a generation of vipers is that they're viper babies, children of snakes. And of course, the OED reveals that generation could once mean that very thing, offspring, children. This sense is now marked as obsolete. This one tripped me up for years and years. I took Jesus' rebuke to apply broadly to all who were alive at that time. It's still hard for me to make my ear hear it in another way, just like it's hard for a lot of my King James only friends to hear study to show thyself approved in another way. But if we want to understand what the King James translators intended, we have to make ourselves speak their English rather than ours. I'm not saying, of course, that generation means offspring or children every time it occurs in the King James. It doesn't. But sometimes it does. Context may help you discern it now that you know that it can be a false friend. False friend 147, rid. Psalm 82 contains this prayer. Deliver the poor and needy, rid them out of the hand of the wicked. Isn't that a funny thing to say? Rid them out of the hand of the wicked? To rid is to make someone or something free of a troublesome or unwanted person or thing. Sample sentence, we now have the greatest chance ever to rid the world of nuclear weapons. It almost sounds like the psalmist is saying, get these troublesome, poor, and needy out of the hand of the wicked, because the wicked don't want them there. The Hebrew word there doesn't mean get rid of, it means to pull out or to save. So why didn't the King James translators just say, save them out of the hand of the wicked? They had the word save. Why didn't they say, pull them out of the hand of the wicked? Because that's just what rid meant in a context like this one in 1611 English, to release, set free, rescue, save. The OED comments that this use was very common in the 16th century. Needless to say, it isn't now. The OED is very, very attentive to the way English speakers use their language. So when the psalmist says in Psalm 144, rid me and deliver me from the hand of strange children, the OED carefully describes a transitive, reflexive use of the word, meaning to free or release oneself from or out of. Once again, I find myself simply unable to believe the people who tell me, and tell me all the time, that they can understand the King James Version just fine. I am not mocking these people, but maybe they don't understand the word understand. Again, I am completely serious here. For them, getting the general gist or feeling is enough, but not for me, or you wouldn't have made it this far. 3 more. False friend 148, target. In 1 Kings 10:16, we read that King Solomon made 200 targets of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went to one target. Who but an obscenely wealthy man makes targets out of gold? They're just going to get dinged up in target practice. Unless you use soft-tipped arrows, I guess. But if you don't, some of the gold's going to scatter to oblivion when it's struck by projectiles during target practice. But of course, target in 1611, in a context like this one, did not mean a person, object, or place selected as the aim of an attack. It meant a light round shield or buckler. The OED comments that this use is now chiefly historical. Now, maybe there is some special reason why we've just got to use this very precise word target to describe this particular shield. Nope, I checked the Hebrew, and if anything, target is misleading to the relatively few people who actually know what it once meant. I am not saying that the King James translators committed an error in this case. I don't think they did, and I'd have to do a lot more work to be confident that they did. But my best resources are telling me that the Hebrew word here, translated target, means large shield, and yet the English word target meant small shield. Not a big deal. There's got to be a good reason for it, I assume. But what it means is that the word shield ought to be just fine for today. And it is. Shield is the word that modern translations use here. By the way, in 1 Samuel 17, Goliath is said in the King James to be wearing a target of brass between his shoulders. This was not a taunt like, ha ha, if you want to hit me, try right here. It's not like that Far Side cartoon, Bummer of a Birthmark, Hal. It's just a shield. Target is a false friend. I feel certain that plenty of people will not even think to look it up because they think they already know what a target is. Who in the world doesn't know what a target is? False friend 149, naught. I think many people know that naught meant nothing back in ye olden days. It was all for naught. Actually, we still use the word that way. But what about this use? And the men of the city said unto Elisha, Behold, I pray thee, the situation of this city is pleasant, as my Lord seeth, but the water is not, and the ground barren. Does this mean there is no water? The water is nothing? What? The word not here translates the very simple, exceedingly common Hebrew word for bad or evil. The water is bad. That's what the Hebrew says. So why did the King James translators say that the water was not? Because back in 1611, in a context like this one, the word not had this now obsolete sense available. Of food or drink, unwholesome, bad, unfit for consumption. Which brings us to false friend 150. Naughty or naughtiness. We have gone through an absolute superfluity of false friends today. I gave almost all my free time during Christmas break to do this video because I was so set on getting it done. I wanted another 50. My wife was supportive. My kids were either playing with new toys that they got for Christmas or with friends, and they let me do this. I did something I rarely do, and I stayed up late and typed in bed on more than one occasion at a time when I probably ought to have been working on design so that I can feed my family. By the way, please do send me your church web design and hosting jobs this year if you want to see this channel continue. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the video. But once the idea of reaching 150 false friends struck me about 2 months ago, I knew I had to get some help and get going. Now, James 1:21. Wherefore lay apart all filthiness and superfluity of naughtiness, and receive with meekness the engrafted word, which is able to save your souls. This phrase, superfluity of naughtiness, is just so fun, so memorable, so quaint. People know it. Or do they? What does it mean? If you know the word superfluous, or even just the prefix super, which comes from Latin and means over or above, you can guess that superfluity means a lot of something or too much of something. But naughtiness? Naughtiness is a word that we use to describe the kinds of things that redeemable characters in movies do. Have you ever noticed this? My family and I watched Red One on VidAngel this Christmas, and I could tell from the very beginning that the main character, even though he was a jerk who sold out Santa Claus, was going to be redeemed. Because the wicked things that he did in the movie, gambling, light womanizing, hacking, neglecting his child, were carefully calibrated to be bad, but not too bad. They got him on Santa's naughty list. The moral of the movie was that everyone is redeemable. And as a Christian, of course, I am in agreement. If I'm redeemable, then everybody is. But, and I hate to get graphic here on False Friend 150, but I just kept thinking, where's Hitler on the naughty list? Did Santa Claus regard him to be redeemable? And what if this main character were played by an unattractive actor rather than the guy who played Captain America? What if he was shown to be guilty of child sexual abuse or of victimizing other vulnerable people in deep and damaging ways? We need a view of redemption that goes far, far beyond getting a deadbeat dad to spend time with his kid again, though that's a great step. The redemption that humans need has to be powerful enough to handle the incredibly vile stuff that we do, the stuff that goes way beyond naughty. This is the salvation I needed and need. This is the salvation that you needed and need. Only in Christ, of course, can we be saved from the truly debauched things that we have done, and done repeatedly, full well knowing what we were doing, sinning against the consciences upon which God has written his law. The thing is, however, that wickedness, evil, malice, depravity, perversion, they are what the Greek word here in James means. This is a word that gets used to name one of the sins that gets the whole human race condemned at the bar of God's justice in the all-important chapter Romans 1. Why did the King James translators choose naughtiness, such a tame word by comparison? Were they softening the teaching of James? No, of course not. The OED shows that naughtiness used to be able to mean wickedness, sinfulness, immorality. This sense is now chiefly archaic or historical. Jesus lived a life with no naughtiness and no wickedness. He lived a life of full obedience to the law. Jesus died to save you and me from naughtiness and from wickedness, to take not just the timeouts and spankings that you and I deserved for our naughtiness, but the jail time, yea, the capital punishment that you and I have deserved repeatedly for our acts of wickedness. We have taken God's good gifts and perverted them. We have betrayed those we love. We have treated the God of the universe, who made us and sustains us and loves us, like he isn't worth our time. Jesus rose again on the third day to prove that he has power over death and can not just take away your guilt, but positively give you a quality that the Bible calls righteousness. And that salvation will take you all the way to the same eternal, indestructible life that Jesus himself has. I end my False Friends series with the gospel, the same gospel I was taught in King James Onlyism, praise God. None of the many disagreements and debates and disputes that I've talked about on my channel with my King James Only brothers has been as important as what I share with King James Onlyists, a belief, a rock-solid belief in the inestimably precious eternal gospel of Jesus Christ. That's 150. From hitherto forth and for always more, I shall rechristen my 50 False Friends series as 150 False Friends in the King James Version. There are more, of course. I and my friends have collected more. In fact, I want to thank those who sent me false friends, including Caleb Richardson, Caleb Schaff, Caleb Frisk, Scott Sanjay Hayes, David Todd, Joseph Hans, Omar Schrock, the inimitable Isaiah Reed, Josiah Dennis, Rob Pettifer, Freddie Castaneda, Eric Couture, and more. I sincerely apologize for leaving out other names. I just couldn't keep track of them all. And I think there are more false friends that I and my friends have not collected from the King James. An ex-Ruckmanite sent me dozens of possibilities that I have yet to work through all the way. Not that I am the official arbiter of what belongs on the list, just the official arbiter of what belongs on my list of 150. I want you to know that I rejected many, many potential false friends that were sent to me by viewers over the last 5 years. They have to meet my criteria. In particular, language change has to cause some unwitting misunderstanding. I admit that I let things get terribly, terribly subtle with moisture and apple of the eye. I'm giving you permission to reject those too, even though I'm right. I'm only subtly right with them. But I promised to stop engaging King James Onlyism on this channel on this date, and I am going to do so. This video is set to end at exactly 11:59 p.m. in the time zone of my birth on December 31st, 2024. I may come across King James false friends in the future, and I'm taking this literally last-minute opportunity to let you know out there that I may have a few, just a few, more false friends videos for you in coming years. But I won't use them to engage with King James Onlyism as I have generally done in the past. Some of these false friends may even be found in modern versions. We'll see. I will leave King James Onlyism completely out of it, as I did in my forthcoming book from Lexham Press that is now with my editor, King James Words You Don't Know, You Don't Know. I will discuss this book on my channel too when it's released. I also plan to put together a website with more information, timed to release with the book. Be on the outlook for that. But here on YouTube, be on the lookout for that. That's interesting. Here on YouTube, I'm truly and really stopping the official series at 150. Now, you may ask, man and brother, what shall we do? I end my 150 false friends in the King James series with 3 quick calls to action. Number 1, Don't read only one Bible translation, especially not one made into archaic English. To my King James only brothers out there, I urge you, at least pick up the New King James and Modern English Version to read alongside your King James. Read them like commentaries. I don't care. Just read them. Use them. Humbly let them help you understand God's inspired word. That's the main thing I care about. Number 2, call to action. Ask church and institutional leaders nicely for a translation change if they still use the King James. I don't actually believe that King James only leaders are opposed to understanding God's word. I believe they are in favor of it. I think that in many King James only churches, a vocal minority is holding everyone else in the church hostage. That includes the bus kids and your own kids. And it's certainly true that this situation cannot be allowed to last. The Bible is too clear. Edification requires intelligibility. So I encourage you to ask your leaders nicely and respectfully and directly and personally and individually without telling other members of the congregation so that you don't cause any unnecessary division. Ask them to help you find a translation of whatever Hebrew and Greek texts they prefer into fully intelligible contemporary English. Tell them you'd love to use the New King James or Modern English Version, or the Simplified King James in particular, because those are translated from the very same Hebrew and Greek texts as the King James Version. Also, politely let major institutional leaders, like presidents of King James only colleges, know that you would love to see them throw their weight behind an English-only King James revision. Some will not listen. That's okay. That's not up to you. As the old saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you'd better decide in advance whether to use leather straps or his kidneys. Call to action number 3. I need your monthly support. I gave massive amounts of my free time for 5 years to pushing back as graciously as I knew how against King James onlyism. This false doctrine has hurt so many people I love. It has told so many untruths. It has caused so much division, contention, and strife. But my main body of work on this topic has come to an end. I've taken something bad away from a lot of people, King James onlyism. As the channel moves into the future, I plan to give them something good in exchange: instruction and encouragement in the use of multiple English Bible translations. That won't be the only thing that I talk about on this channel, but it will be a significant theme, perhaps the most significant. I will answer questions about Bible translation and about Bible translations, specific passages. I do this all the time already. I will engage in the same kind of Bible nerdiness that you've come to know and tolerate. I will, as I promised, be more constructive, at least for a while. I hope to, in time, to punch left in order to balance out 5 years of mostly punching right. And I literally cannot do this work. It would not be fair to my family without your financial support at any level on YouTube or Patreon. I have what may be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go full-time on my own as a YouTuber and church web designer. That is my current plan if the Lord wills. And if you will come back in 1 minute, I'll have more specific things to say about the future of the channel. I have what I hope will be some exciting news. And now, hopefully, thou understandest what thou readest in the King James Version a little better.